Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Priorities. My name is Paauw and I'll be your presenter. Today, I look forward to sharing two of my favorite tools for managing priorities, which will enable you to enjoy greater peace of mind by clarifying what's most important and creating a plan that will help you keep first things first in your work and personal life. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, today's webinar will be available on demand for replay and is accessible through the same link you're using now. Toward the end of this webinar, you'll receive the access link to the webinar notes along with a special offer. Next, I'd love to hear from you during or after today's presentation. If you have a question or comments, please type it in the text box in the lower right corner of your screen or email me. I'll be in touch soon to respond. And last, as you think of others who may benefit from what you learned today, I encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. A quick introduction in case we haven't met before. I've been at the helm of my own coaching and consulting practice, Powerfully Organized, since 1995. In 1999, I received my certification as a business and personal coach. Today, I refer to myself as a life architect, helping busy professionals create blueprints for purposeful and productive lives. One of the most common things I hear people say these days is that they feel overwhelmed with everything on their to-do list. There are only so many sticky notes that your brain can manage before you feel like things are spinning out of control. If you feel this way, you're not alone. The vast majority of professionals I talk with feel overwhelmed on a regular basis, and it really takes its toll, especially on their personal relationships and their health. Today, I'll share tips and tools you can immediately begin putting into practice that will help you to enjoy much greater peace of mind while taking care of what's most important to you, both personally and professionally. I'll begin by sharing my own story with you because I think it's important that you understand that I've struggled with many of the same challenges that you may have. Much of what I teach others comes from what I've learned through my own experiences. In 2005, 10 years after I had established my business, I was introduced to a productivity tool that I loved so much that I became a distributor, with the idea that I would share this wonderful tool alongside my continued work as a coach and a consultant. By 2007, this new part of my business had grown so much that I was essentially working two full-time businesses. That year, I also joined Jack Canfield's Platinum Mastermind group, and I was heavily steeped in personal development work. This involved flying to Southern California 7 times over the next year for meetings with Jack and others in our mastermind group, plus being on weekly calls with Jack and some of his amazing guests. We also had homework. Although I would not trade that experience for anything, to say that my plate was full would have been an understatement. During the first quarter of 2007, I lived with a constant feeling of being overwhelmed. The more I thought about feeling overwhelmed, the stronger the feeling got. In March of that year, I had a conversation with a friend that I had not seen in years. She'd heard me sing the national anthem at the Seattle Mariners game years before. Remembering that I was a singer, she told me that I needed to audition for a local theater company's production of The Sound of Music, my all-time favorite musical. My reply? There's no possible way I could fit one more thing into my hectic schedule. I'm overwhelmed as it is. She stopped me mid-rant and said, "What did you just say?" I said, "I'm overwhelmed." When I heard myself say it a second time, I realized that this had become a powerful I am statement that I'd been repeating to myself for several months. No wonder I was feeling like such a crazy person. That was the nourishment I had been feeding my brain. I realized it was time to write a new I am statement to replace the one that was keeping me stuck, feeling overwhelmed. Here's the new statement I created. I have all the time I need for what's most important to me. When I catch myself beginning to feel overwhelmed, this I am statement helps me remember the truth. I really do have all the time I need for what's most important. I am the one who chooses my priorities. I love the advice that Napoleon Hill gave on this topic. He said, "Those who program themselves for success find a way to succeed, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Solutions to most problems come from one source, and one source alone: yourself." I learned that my job is to sort the priorities. What a difference this shift has made in my life. I decided to audition for The Sound of Music, and I was cast as one of the nuns. I was the solo a cappella voice that opened the show each night. I had a blast performing that summer in my favorite musical. I had not performed in a stage production for 22 years, and I had so much fun being part of a cast again. I've learned that we get what we consistently focus on, even if your focus is on not getting something. For example, don't think about a pink elephant with polka dots. As I said that, I'll bet you were imagining a pink elephant with polka dots. Most people focus on what they don't want and wonder why they keep getting more of it. It's much easier to choose what to focus on rather than choosing what not to focus on. Today I'm going to share 4 productivity tools that will help you to manage your priorities. The first is a tool to help you clarify your priorities. The second is a planning process to keep you focused on what's most important. Although we only have time for mention of the other 2 tools, I'll share a system that helps you to remember important follow-up and a system that will help you to find what you need when you need it. If you'd like more information about these last 2 tools, I'll provide information a little later about how you can learn more. When you combine these tools and begin to work more productively, your profits will increase, your clients will be happier, and you will enjoy much greater peace of mind. So often people focus on working more efficiently. Efficiency is doing more things faster. Effectiveness, on the other hand, is doing the right things. It might also include doing things faster, but the focus is on what matters most. I love what best-selling author Stephen Covey had to say about this. What does it matter how much we do if what we're doing isn't what matters most? With that in mind, I'll share one of my favorite tools with you, which will help you to clarify your priorities so you can manage your time and energy more effectively. To help you make better decisions about how you spend your time, Stephen Covey created a time management matrix, which breaks time into 4 quadrants. I'll take some time here to review each of these 4 quadrants so you can better understand the power of applying this model to your own life. Quadrant 1 is the quadrant of necessity. This quadrant represents activities that are necessary for you to focus on because they are urgent or time-sensitive, and they're important to you. We tend to focus on Quadrant 1 activities because they are urgent, and the need to do these activities makes itself known to us. These activities are hard to ignore because our life experiences have taught us that when we ignore Quadrant 1 activities, we get into trouble. If you have a lot of Quadrant 1 activities in your life, and you find yourself frequently saying, "I have to," "I should," or "I gotta," I call that victim language, it may be time for you to reconsider what you're doing. An estimated 80% of the population puts themselves into a self-imposed prison cell on a regular basis. We forfeit our freedom of choice through our own thought processes. When I hear someone using victim language, I often ask them, do you have to, or do you choose to? There are very few things in life that you have to do. Some urgencies, like medical emergencies, are not something we consciously choose. It's something we simply must handle. My father did not choose to have a heart attack. However, at some level, he did make a choice by choosing to live a sedentary life and making poor choices in his diet, despite the warning bells sounded by his doctor. He'd had high blood pressure for quite some time and was not doing his part to manage his heart disease. Had he focused more time in Quadrant 2, not urgent but important activities, doing regular exercise and eating a healthier diet, he may have avoided escalating his health management to Quadrant 1, urgent and important. Unfortunately, my father's heart attack cost him his life at the young age of 47. I learned from his experience about how important it is for me to focus on Quadrant 2 activities for my own self-care. So let's move on to Quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 is known as the Quadrant of Quality and Personal Leadership. This quadrant represents activities that are important, but because they're not urgent, they're easy to put on the back burner for when we have more time. In order to focus on these activities, one must be proactive. The more time we spend in Quadrant 2, the more quality we add to our lives. If we neglect Quadrant 2 activities long enough, sometimes they become Quadrant 1 activities. For example, if your spouse came home and told you that he or she was leaving if you didn't devote more time to him or her, relationship building, which is generally considered Quadrant 2, not urgent but important, would probably become Quadrant 1, an urgent and important activity. Unfortunately, more time never comes. We all get 168 hours a week. The best way to find more time is to reduce the amount of time you spend in Quadrants 3 and 4 and invest that time in Quadrant 2 activities instead. So let's talk about Quadrant 3. Quadrant 3 is known as the Quadrant of Deception. This quadrant represents activities that are not important to you, but they're urgent. It's known as the Quadrant of Deception because we get deceived into believing that these activities are important because they're urgent, even though we've identified these activities as not important. The word urgent means that the activity is either time-sensitive or deadline-driven. For example, an incoming phone call is considered urgent because the phone is ringing right now. It may or may not be important, but if you don't answer the phone soon, it will stop ringing. Sometimes incoming email, text messages, and social media posts feel urgent, although they are often not important. You'll need to say no to or renegotiate activities that are urgent but not important to you. The only exception to this would be activities that are important to someone who is important to you. So you choose to make that activity a priority, even though the activity itself is not important to you. There's a huge difference between choosing to make something important and feeling like you have to do it. I call that victim thinking. Here's an example. When my daughter was little, she wanted Goodnight Moon read to her every single night at bedtime. Reading that same book every evening was not personally important to me, but because the relationship was important to me and that activity was important to her, I chose to make it important to read that book to her every night at bedtime. It was urgent because bedtime was at a specific time. In other words, I moved a Quadrant 3 activity to Quadrant 1 because I valued the relationship. Now let's move on to Quadrant 4. Quadrant 4 is known as the Quadrant of Waste. This quadrant represents activities that are not important and are not urgent. The most common Quadrant 4 activity I've encountered in my work with busy people is escape activities. When the stress level gets high enough, some people escape from reality by doing activities that do not address or resolve the problem. This is considered wasteful. Note that the same activity can fall into Quadrant 2 or Quadrant 4. If you are enjoying true recreation, or you're relaxing, resting, and rejuvenating yourself, the activity falls into Quadrant 2. If you're engaged in an escape activity, doing something to avoid addressing a problem or a challenge in your life, it's considered a Quadrant 4 activity. In other words, It's the motivation behind doing the activity that determines whether or not it's a Quadrant 2 rejuvenating activity or a Quadrant 4 escape activity. You are the only one who can determine this. Many people are urgency addicted, a self-destructive behavior that temporarily fills a void created by unmet needs. This type of addiction can be as dangerous as other commonly recognized addictions and dependencies. The goal is to manage activities in Quadrant 1, focus on activities in Quadrant 2, and avoid activities in Quadrants 3 and 4, activities that you've deemed as not important. Because so many of us are urgency addicted, we tend to spend the bulk of our time in Quadrants 1 and 3, doing activities that are urgent and important, or urgent but not important. Now let's talk about some ways that you can help yourself better manage Quadrant 1 and focus on Quadrant 2 activities. You may have heard of the 80-20 rule, which was originally called the Pareto principle. It's a universal principle which is also called the vital few and trivial many. The 80-20 rule means that with anything, time, resources, space, effort, etc., a few, or 20%, are vital and many, 80%, are trivial. Here are some examples of how we can apply the 80-20 rule to our lives. See if you recognize any that hold true for you. 80% of what you file or store is never referenced again. The other 20% is what you access regularly. This includes paper, clothes, and other tangible items. Think of the clothes in your closet. If you're like most people, you wear 20% of the items 80% of the time, and the other 80% you only wear 20% of the time. 80% of your measurable results will come from 20% of the items on your to-do list. 20% of your employees produce 80% of the results you desire. 80% of your managerial concerns are caused by 20% of the same recurring problems. That means that if you just focused on solving your top recurring problems, it would resolve 80% of your managerial concerns. 80% of your employee or subcontractor concerns are with the same 20% of personnel. Are you beginning to understand how applying the Pareto principle to your life can help you stay focused on what's most important? The value of the Pareto principle is that it reminds us to focus on what matters most. Today we have more responsibilities and choices pulling at us than ever before, so we need to work smarter. If something isn't going to get done, make sure it's part of the trivial many, the 80% of activities that are not as crucial. Consistent application of this rule will lead to dramatically improved productivity. While the rule is not an absolute, you can use it as a guide to determine if you are truly focusing on the 20%, the vital few, or the 80%, the trivial many. Even if the actions you take are just small steps, take action. True progress results from a consistent focus on the top 20% of your most important action steps. The world does not pay you for what you know. Many people say they want greater success, and yet they do not take action. They analyze, plan, study, organize, and talk, but they don't take action. Note that 20% of an 8-hour workday is only 96 minutes. What would happen if you were super focused on your most important activities for just 96 minutes a day? Even if you wasted the other 6.5 hours, you'd probably be far ahead. Now mind you, I'm not suggesting that you waste the remaining hours, just making a point about how valuable it is to identify your most important results-producing activities, so you can be sure that if nothing else happens, you have that handled. There are 3 common challenges that get in the way of putting your first things first. First, you need to clarify your priorities. Be crystal clear about your goals or intentions. Then organize your time by identifying and planning specific activities that will help you accomplish your goals or intentions, and schedule the time to do these things. Finally, execute your plan by following through with your intentions and doing what you say you'll do. A great way to support you with this is to build in some accountability. I encourage you to ask yourself which one of these 3 challenges provides the greatest stumbling block to your success. Then focus on making improvements in that area. Most people don't plan to fail. They fail to plan. Stephen Covey reminds us that the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. The best way I've found to do this is to schedule a weekly appointment with yourself and follow the 6-step weekly planning process outlined by Stephen Covey in his best-selling book, First Things First. So let's begin with a quick overview, and then I'll review each step in greater detail. Here are the 6 steps in the weekly planning process. Connect with your mission. Review your key roles. Identify your weekly goals or choices in writing. Schedule your intentions into your calendar. Exercise integrity in the moment of choice as you live your week. Evaluate and learn. Now let's go through each step in greater detail. Step 1 is to review your mission statement at the beginning of your weekly planning session. This serves as a compass or directional tool to help you make decisions that align with your values, vision, and purpose. Your values represent what's most important to you. Your vision is about who you want to be. Your purpose is what gives your life meaning. And your mission is about what you will do that will honor your values, vision, and purpose. If you would like a tool to help you begin drafting your own personal mission statement, Franklin Covey provides one at franklincovey.com/MSB, that stands for Mission Statement Builder. Although most businesses have a mission statement, only a very small percentage of the population has written a personal mission statement. Once you've written yours, begin your weekly planning time by reviewing it. This is the foundation upon which you will plan your week. Step 2 is to review your key roles. Again, most people have never actually written out their roles to review on a weekly basis, so let's talk about that for a minute. You always start your weekly planning looking at the role of self. As Mother Teresa once said, to keep the lamp burning, you have to keep putting oil in it. It's so important to take care of yourself first. Only then are you fully available to assist others. When flying somewhere, flight attendants always remind us that if the cabin depressurizes, we're to put our own oxygen masks on first, before assisting others. Why? Because if we lose consciousness, we won't be available to help ourselves or anyone else. Next, identify a maximum of 7 roles of greatest importance to you. Planning with these roles in mind will help you stay focused on your priorities and build balance into your life. You can also create sub-roles for major roles, such as your business. I'll share an example of what this looks like using my own roles. Here you see the 4 areas of self at the top: physical, mental, spiritual, and social, followed by 7 key roles. I've taken my role as a business owner, and I've identified some key sub-roles for that. The third step is to identify your weekly goals or choices in writing. Think of 2 or 3 important results you want to accomplish during the coming week in each role you identified in step 2. Write this week's intentions next to each role. By identifying your specific intentions this way, you're more likely to build balance into your life. I prefer thinking of goals as weekly choices or intentions because for me, goals sometimes feel like a should or a have to once they're set. Remember that language and self-talk are very important and powerful, so use whatever terminology speaks to you in this process. Make your goals, choices, or intentions as specific as possible. For example, drink more water is not very specific, but drink 64 ounces of water daily is very specific and measurable. At the end of the week, you'll be able to say you either did or didn't do it. When you're specific, it's much easier to measure your progress. Let's review some tips to help you identify effective weekly goals or choices. For each role, identify 2 or 3 important results you want to accomplish during the coming week. That's not to say that you won't do anything else with that role, just that if you did nothing else in the coming week, you'd want to be sure that you do these things. Focus on the important rather than just the urgent. Once you fill in the blank time management matrix template that I provide for you in the handout, you'll be able to refer back to that as a reminder. When you combine your values with your key roles, this will help you set your goals or intentions for the week. Goals can be focus areas or activities. For example, you may have an intention to be a better reflective listener with your spouse. Although that is not an activity, it may be something important for you to focus on as part of your planning for the coming week. If you want to schedule it in, think of an activity that you do with your spouse, such as eating dinner together, and you can write into your calendar, dinner, reflective listening, as a reminder. As you go through each role, it's okay to choose not to do anything with a particular role that week. Remember that there's a difference between choosing not to do something and not getting around to it. Remember that every time you say yes to someone or something, you are in fact saying no to someone or something else. And finally, remember to check your self-talk and listen for when you hear yourself say, I should, I gotta, or I have to. When you recognize that self-talk, ask yourself, do I choose to? Don't be a victim. Step 4 is to schedule your goals, choices, or intentions into your calendar. Here are some tips to help with that. Look at the week ahead with your goals in mind and schedule time to take the actions required to achieve them. Be especially mindful of Quadrant 2 activities, important to you but not urgent. If you don't schedule these activities, they probably won't happen. Be sure that you have some white space in your calendar. If every minute of every day is already filled, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's important that you allow time to handle unexpected but important activities that will most likely come up during the week that you don't know about yet. And here's a tool tip. If you use a paper calendar, use a weekly planner rather than a daily or monthly planner. Use a pencil to schedule things. That way, if you need to move something around, it'll be easy to erase it and write it somewhere else. If your calendar is electronic, it probably syncs with your smartphone. Do your planning at a computer screen where you can see the whole week at once. Step 5 is to exercise integrity in the moment of choice. Stephen Covey reminds us that quality of life depends on what happens in the space between stimulus and response. Here are some tips to help you as you live your week. When making schedule adjustments, connect with your mission to stay on track. In other words, if someone makes a request of your time, check with yourself to see if the request is in alignment with your values, vision, purpose, and mission. Remember that when you say yes to someone or something, you are saying no to someone or something else. In order to live your week with integrity, if something more important or urgent comes up, reschedule the planned activity for another time whenever possible. Remember that your decisions are based on your priorities. Be a gatekeeper. Say no to things which will derail you from honoring your mission, purpose, values, and vision. And this bears repeating. Don't play the victim. It's your life and you're in control. Remember, I choose to versus I have to. I'll share a personal story that exemplifies how powerful this is. Years ago, I was working to get in the habit of exercising first thing in the morning. I am not an early morning person, but I had committed to getting up a half hour earlier than usual so I could fit this into my day first thing. I'd set my alarm, and when it went off, I'd say to myself, "Ugh, I have to get up and exercise." I would hit the snooze button and roll over and go back to sleep. By the time I got up, I didn't have time to exercise. I had told my coach about my intention, and for a couple weeks I had reported to her that I was not keeping most of my exercise commitments with myself. The second week she said, "Can we look at this together?" And then she asked, "So what do you say to yourself when the alarm goes off?" And I replied, "That I have to get up and exercise." She repeated back to me, "That you have to get up and exercise?" It was then that I realized the defeating self-talk I had been using. She asked me what other message I could replace with that, and I said, "When the alarm goes off, I choose to remind myself that I am committed to good health, and I choose to get up and exercise, regardless of how I feel at the moment." It was a big aha moment for me. The next day I did this, and I was amazed at the difference in my response to getting up. Now, ultimately, I've adjusted my schedule, especially in the winter months when it's dark, so my first appointment of the day begins a little later, and I can still get up and exercise first. I had a coaching client years ago who was not honoring her exercise commitment, and when we explored her language, she was using the word want. She kept telling me that she wanted to walk the dog daily, but she was not doing it. I asked her, "Do you want to, or do you choose to?" Want leaves you wanting. Choose puts you into action. When she started saying to herself, "I choose to make time to walk the dog daily," the next logical question was, when? And she started scheduling it into her day and making it happen. The sixth and last step is to evaluate and learn. And Covey reminds us, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting. One definition of insanity is to keep doing the same things and expecting different results. In preparation for the coming week, I suggest that you evaluate the past week. Ask yourself these questions. What worked? What didn't work? And what can you do differently in the coming week so you might have a different outcome next week? This is also a good time to evaluate how committed you are to taking action. If you've had an intention for weeks, and each week you notice that you are not doing it, it may be time to dive deeper and try to understand what's stopping you from honoring your intentions, or if you're really committed to it. I move this to step 2 for future weeks, so I review my mission or purpose, and then I evaluate how the previous week went before planning for the coming week. That way I can put my learning into practice and make improvements this week based on what worked and what didn't work the week before. Now that we've reviewed all 6 steps, here are a few tips to help you with the process. Schedule an hour each week for your planning session. Some people like to do this on Friday afternoon before leaving the office for the week. Some like to do it on Sunday afternoon or evening for the coming week. As you're doing your planning, have a stack of 3x5 cards next to you to jot down the to-do things that pop into your head as you're doing your planning. Jot down one thought per card. Do not allow yourself to start doing those things. This will derail you from finishing your planning for the coming week. So simply move those sticky notes off your brain and onto the 3x5 cards so that you can let them go until you're finished with your planning. You may want to carve out a few minutes at the end of your planning session for deciding what to do with the things you wrote down on the 3x5 cards. If you've taken my Buried in Paper webinar, you'll know exactly what to do with them. Do your planning in an inspiring location where you will not be interrupted or distracted. Sometimes, changing the environment where you do your planning can help you think more creatively. I suggest that you create a template for your roles and sub-roles, either in a Word document or a spreadsheet. This will make your weekly planning easier. You can either start with a clean template each week, or if you do planning on your computer, you can simply replace the goals or choices you wrote down last week next to each role with this week's intentions. Don't cut corners. Follow all 6 steps of the weekly planning process. It does not work the same if you leave out any of the steps. Dick Bowen, an executive with a pharmaceutical company, participated in a workshop that I facilitated years ago, and 3 years later he emailed me with this message. I thought I knew it all when it came to time management, use of Franklin planners, to-do lists, etc. Your workshop 3 years ago trained me how to become more disciplined and faithful to my time management goals as they related to work-life balance, more time with family, increased productivity, more time spent with my representatives, etc. I'm still using the tools I already had, just using them much more effectively and efficiently. I've been committed to using your disciplines, and amazingly, I've found myself realizing my goals much more closely than before. I continue to use many of your precepts to this day, and even go back and review my notes from your session whenever I feel like I'm slipping into some of my old time, energy-wasting ways. I love hearing from clients several years after we've completed our work together, and they report that what they learned is still working. This confirms for me that the principles I teach are time-tested, and they will work for any professional who consistently puts these principles into practice. A few minutes ago, I mentioned another popular free webinar I teach called Buried in Paper. You'll learn a simple process that will help you make decisions quickly about things that come flying into your busy life. I also teach you how to set up an effective reminder system for all the things that require follow-up. You can register for this by going to my website at orgcoach.net and clicking on the Resources menu. And if you struggle with finding things that you file or store, I invite you to participate in my free webinar, Find Anything in 5 Seconds or Less. I'll show you a system I've been using since 1996 that enables me to find anything I file or store in just seconds, and I've implemented this system for hundreds of others who are able to do the same. You'll also find the registration link for this webinar on my website at orgcoach.net under the Resources menu. As promised at the beginning of this webinar, I have a handout that will help you recap all that we've covered today. This document also includes links to recommended resources, tools, and information that I've mentioned during our time together. To access this, please visit orgcoach.net/Managing Priorities Handout. At the beginning of this webinar, I promised that you would receive a special offer if you stayed with me to the end of the presentation. So here's my special offer to you. Sometimes we get to a point where we're just too busy responding to the world around us rather than living the life we want. We get so caught up in the day-to-day that our priorities seem to drown in the noise created by everyone else. If that's you, and you'd like a fresh, outside perspective on your situation, including an action plan to move you from where you are to where you want to be, I invite you to schedule a no-cost 30-minute discovery call with me by phone or Skype. Here are some things I can help you with. Perhaps you'd like to get organized and increase overall productivity, find ways to enjoy greater fulfillment and balance in your work and personal life, receive help navigating something big, such as a change in career, marital status, family change, or retirement, start a business or take an existing business to the next level, improve your health and relationships, get support and encouragement as you work toward achieving a big goal. Or perhaps you have another burning issue you'd like support addressing. During our call, we'll talk about your vision for success. We'll uncover hidden challenges that may sabotage your success, and we'll identify next steps you can take to create your blueprint for getting you from where you are to where you want to be. To schedule this, go to orgcoach.net/schedule and reserve a time that works for us to speak by phone or Skype. My greatest joy is to empower and equip others to live the life of freedom and fulfillment they desire. I look forward to providing you with tools and processes to organize your entire life so your environment and lifestyle reflect your values and passions. I invite you to schedule your private, no-cost discovery call with me today, and I look forward to reconnecting with you soon.